Hello again. We're back. How's it going, Jonathan?
I am doing really well. We just had a big charity golf event down here in Tampa, Florida, and that was
Somebody playing
yesterday.
golf.
Yeah, a
Big,
lot
big
of fun
fancy.
time.
Yeah, we are back. Welcome everyone to GPS Live for the week of May 6th. So we're going to be talking about some interesting stories today. Before we get started, this week we do have one thing that we're going to show really quickly, so you're going to not see our faces real quick. But the views and opinions expressed by Jonathan and myself are our own. They do not necessarily reflect the views of GuidePoint Security as a company. So keep that in mind. As we go through our stories this week, I've had a great week. I'm excited to talk about some of this stuff. It was World Password Day yesterday, and that's going to come into a couple of our stories there.
What's your password?
My password, it's actually, you can just find it in the top 10 list. It's everywhere.
I thought that's when we tell the world our password.
No,
you mean
I'm
that's
sorry.
not what it is?
You've drastically misunderstood, Jonathan.
I apologize.
We need to have a conversation with a couple people in the company, I think. No, it was nice though. We went and looked up some statistics. It's really interesting. Between last year and this year, pretty much nothing has changed, which is a little troubling. I think the number one most used password is still 123456. And then coming in at number 2 is 123456789. So
because really, of the length complexities, is that what we're upgrading to?
Potentially, but I think we're really breaking the creative mold as a society and as humanity when it comes to passwords. But lest you be worried that it's all just number strings. Number 3 and 4, I think, respectively, were password and password 123. So we are at least getting some letters in there. But it's World Password Day yesterday. We've got some stories that talk about that. We've got some stories that touch on some things that we talked about a little bit last week. So without any further ado, do we want to just go ahead and dive right in?
Yeah. Oh, and one last thing. Earlier this week, it was also Star Wars Day, so May the 4th be with you.
May the 4th be with you. Now the 6th, technically Revenge of the 6th. If we're going to be looking at things properly. May the 4th be with you. Revenge of the 6th, whichever side you fall on. Live long and prosper. So let's go ahead and dive in. I think this first story is actually really interesting because it touches on something that you and I explicitly talked about last week.
Perfect. And so this particular article comes from NIST, right? One of our favorite security advisories here within at least the US government. And we're talking about an update to the cybersecurity supply chain risk management guidance. And so just to really take a perspective on that foundation, I'm not talking about the company that makes the plastic boxes for your widget. Now I'm talking software supply chain, right? And this is a very good one because we all, in a sense, depend on someone else's software, right? I mean, our computers are full of tools and components developed by other companies that we rely on a daily basis, right? Yeah. So what are we seeing here? Like, what's their newest take?
So the new take coming out of NIST is guidance on as you're building your tools, as you're looking at projects, and as you're assessing supply chain risks. I think one of the first things that they really call out here is something that you and I talked about already last week, which is the idea that as you are looking at the tools and the projects that you're considering using, you have to take into consideration the security of the individual components of that project, whether they are using open source tools or other tools that might have already had known vulnerabilities from third parties, anything like that. That's the first real piece of guidance that they give is make sure you are considering the full scope of everything, not just, is this one company that I'm looking at reputable? What companies did they look at? What companies did they use? It really starts to bring in the actual image of the chain as opposed to just do I trust the people that I'm working with? You also have to remember that, do you trust them enough to trust the people they're working with, and then the people that they're working with, until you can get down to root. Well, obviously that's very hard, but
we're a lot of times we already have a couple challenges in this space, right? We have challenges around asset identification and different hosts and systems on our network and people having shadow IT and stuff like that. We have challenges around identity information and how we're dealing with accounts and service accounts even, and roles and responsibilities within those accounts and groups. And this is another thing that comes to it. How are we handling application inventory? How are we handling development component inventory? We talked very heavily on this last week because we saw this kind of challenge happening in major manufacturers of antivirus software.
Yeah. And I think I do want to remind folks too, because we have a few people watching live right now, that if you guys are using the comment box, we can actually see those wherever the site that you're viewing it on puts comments. You can go ahead and throw those in, and we should, based on the platform that we're using, which we did validate for vulnerabilities. We should be able to see those and be able to interact and talk with you guys as well. So
please
feel free to
send them on through.
Yeah.
So they're the premise of this, right? And the big focus is that this guidance, right? And this is kind of coming from the article, is that the guidance can be used to build that cybersecurity supply chain risk considerations, right? And
Right.
Again, this a lot of stuff is it's not going to be like, this is the exact way you need to do it. It's these are the things you need to think about and how they pertain to your specific organization, right? And also considering stuff like the requirements into stuff like the acquisition process. How do you decide what tools or software suites you're going to use? And then finally, with this information, creating that program for continuously monitoring, right? Because things are constantly changes, revisions, updates, things of that manner. And so monitoring and then finally managing that risk within your organization. And so it covers a lot of the different aspects that you can apply to your business.
Yeah. And I think another thing that's good that they call out is beyond just kind of the software side of things. They do specifically, at least in the article that we're pulling this from, which is coming from HIPAAjournal.com. Remember, HIPAA is spelled with 2 A's and 1 P. So HIPAAjournal.com, you can find this article. But one of the things that they call out very specifically is the fact that even the physical hardware that we're using, it might be designed in one country, have pieces manufactured in multiple, assembled in another, shipped to wherever it is that you're going to be purchasing it from, and having software put on it across that entire spectrum. And so, taking that into consideration too. I mean, I remember when I was still in the Marines, I think it was around 2013 when this happened, but there was a really big kind of story going around about this almost microscopic chip that was apparently being installed in networking.
Like the backdoor chip in the circuit board that was
and it just looked like another fuse or another resistor or something like that on the board, and it was this huge story that has this Chinese manufacturer been installing a backdoor in the hardware that almost every organization and government uses. And I was actually deployed at the time, so that story came up, and we were like, "Wow, that's fascinating." And then by the time we had any time to focus on thinking about it, it was passé. It was gone. But it's just kind of an interesting. This has always been something that we need to pay attention to, and it seems like with the kind of spate of high profile stuff that's happened across the last 2 years, people are really starting to actually focus in on this and think about, hey, where are we sourcing these things from? Are we opening ourselves up to this kind of potential? And actually something that we're talking about a lot at GuidePoint right now is cyber insurance, right? And the ways that the cyber insurance market is changing, and the requirements that you have to meet in order to, get a policy and then be able to use that policy should something ever happen. And this stuff all plays into that as well, right? Do you have these proper management structures in place so that a insurance provider knows you did take all the proper steps and they can pay out on whatever plan you have?
Absolutely.
Just some really interesting stuff. So what's our next one? Do you have more?
No, I was gonna say this is really gonna be helpful as we segue how do we deal with all of these big companies that we're handling on a day-to-day basis with their software and their suites and their toolings within our networks and our systems. So let's let's talk about how some of these companies are actually looking at improving security rather than necessarily harming it for the rest of us. And so this
And
next article,
speaking of hardware and where it comes from and how we
yeah,
use it.
this next article comes to us from The Verge,
Yep.
and it's focused on Apple, Google, and Microsoft looking at implementing passwordless sign-in on all of their major platforms. And when we mean major, we're talking about, these computer devices that we're using today, but also, our little mobile phones here too.
Yeah.
And the interaction between the two of those. And so I think this is really cool. For a long time, passwords were something that we know, and now we're kind of moving away from that into something that we have. And
Yeah.
that's something that we have is combined with something that we are, which is like that facial scan or the fingerprint scan on our device to authenticate our mobile device now as our new authentication tool, therefore, for the computer that we're using. And so it's this layered security approach, which is very cool.
Yeah, and I think this coming from the three of the largest companies that exist within the space. So coming from Apple, Google, and Microsoft, this is actually it's kind of one of those like finally like this might actually be considered and taken seriously because now all three of these not just saying like we're all going to work towards this on our own, but as a joint effort, the three of them coming together to say this is a problem that needs to be fixed. And I think they're all guilty to a certain respect in the past of having done this kind of thing individually and not looked at broader standards. Like if you look at my MacBook, right, it has a fingerprint reader on it, but if I have my MacBook docked and set somewhere and plugged into my entire setup, so I'm using it as more of a desktop, I can't use that. I have to type in my user password. There's no way for me to have some other authentication method that says, hey, do this, unless I'm using something within the Apple ecosystem, like my watch connected, an Apple Watch connected to it, so that it unlocks. Yeah, I think that's what you do. So,
for years, I'll tell you what is I have been a fan of some of these hardware, components that are already in the FIDO Alliance, and so this is just another way to extend it to utilize stuff that you already have these things today. You don't need to necessarily go out and buy something else. Something that I've also slowly started to notice is we do see a number of websites already doing this. For instance, I can now authenticate to services like eBay using my fingerprint on my cell phone or my MacBook, rather than having to use account credentials. Now that option is there, but it allows me to securely log in as essentially like a second factor. And so very cool. And that's native browser integration level stuff. So
and I the other thing that I really like about it is because it is a cross-platform push. It's all of these companies coming in and saying we're going to help fix this together. Is that it's also going to broaden the spectrum of what you can do, right? Like I'm pretty sure pretty much anyone watching this would be familiar with Okta, right? Whenever I want to jump into our company's Okta, I can get a push to my phone to say, hey, is this actually you? But if I'm on the road and my phone is dead at the moment and I'm doing something vital, I have to wait for my phone to turn on so that I can get network connectivity, do all of those things before I finally get that push.
Yep.
So since this is now a kind of a cross-company initiative, it's opening up the possibility, I think, of having multiple layers where I can say, like, if you can't do this, then we can do this. And if you can't do that, then we can do this. And if you can't do that, then we can do this. And now we have a problem, right? Like, if you can't do any of those, it's clearly not you.
And they're saying, right, that this new procedure will essentially, the goal, right, is to do away with the initial requirement for a password, right? And to kind of take that challenge up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? We're going to kind of do away with that issue that we're already dealing with, as we've seen from World Password Day, and move to something that is going to just really step the game up. So I love it. I think it's very cool, and I can't wait to essentially see where this goes.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's one of those things where it's just like it's been so long, and to finally see progress on it, it's like, oh, are we actually changing now? Finally, not just as like an industry accepting this, but as kind of a broader society and culture saying we need to move past this. I do want to jump back really quickly to call out Bob left a comment when we were talking about the NIST stuff, and we were talking about validating hardware, and he made a great comment. Gray market nicks have burnt many customers,
Yes.
right? Like the the balance of cost with functionality, and how are we going to get this done, and moving towards those more maybe iffy sources of getting hardware or getting licenses or getting things for whatever it is that you're building, and I think that's something that that NIST guidance should certainly help with, if people are actually paying attention to it and following it. Is again validating open source, validating where your hardware and where your software is actually coming from, and making sure that they did the same thing.
And I think this is a great opportunity for a plug here too. I love to throw these in the show, but if you are having trouble dealing with corporate cybersecurity risk, whether it is the identities, the assets, and now furthermore the applications inventory within your organization, we'd love to hear from you here at GuidePoint. This is just one of the many different services that we provide in-house. And if you'd love to sit down and chat, do a little roundtable, a little whiteboard, a little exercise, please be sure to reach out to us at guidepointsecurity.com.
And if you're looking to go passwordless at your company, reach out to Jonathan Singer, because he can probably supply all of your users with one of his old FIDO keys, because he's got a collection of them.
I do have a bit of a problem. I have a tendency of collecting, a number of hardware related keys, and those are all different models too. I've watched them grow over the generations.
Some people collect classic cars. Jonathan Singer collects.
I've been running passwordless for a decade. All right. So, very cool. Well, then, let's find what would be the segue to this next one. Is that
well, I think the segue to the next one, actually, I mean, it's a combination of authentication and validating where your resources are coming from, right? And jumping back to that story, is we were going to talk about, we had thought about talking about this story that was published on Bleeping Computer about the company Heroku forcing password resets on their customers, emailing them saying, hey, we're going to force you to do a password reset. And this is ostensibly related to a security incident. So they are forcing it. They aren't really telling people why they need to reset their passwords, but I always err on the side of caution when it comes to something like that. I would rather have a company tell me to reset my password than not. But we saw there was a line in that story that kind of caught our eye, which was the fact that doing that password reset would invalidate all API tokens.
That's correct.
So that obviously would cause some follow-on effects for companies who are using those APIs and getting things set back up.
The application pipeline and stuff like that,
right?
And all the different tools, because Heroku being an app kind of platform, right? You have all your dev stuff connected to it.
Exactly. So, but that kind of pushed us down a tangential conversation path, and we started looking at other things. We actually found a story that we found a little bit more interesting, which is that published on Dark Reading, this article about Docker being utilized by attackers, and not specifically just
favorite container.
everyone's favorite container setup. Not just hey, cyber criminals and attackers are using Docker to do stuff, but specifically that the Docker remote access API leaves or uses a couple of ports, specifically 2375 and 2376, to allow remote access into their systems or into any Docker image, and so you can just scan for Docker images that have those ports open, Docker images that are using the remote access API, and what these attackers have started doing is actually finding honeypots, so things that are deliberately set up to be attacked, with the intention of capturing an attacker and figuring out what they're doing and how they're doing it. But because these are set up in Docker images and some of these are being configured with those ports still open, with that Docker remote API still there and not changing the default ports or anything, they're able to get in and take full remote control of the honeypot. And so the honeypot actually itself becomes an attack platform.
You were describing it as going after something sweet here. And it's imagine this honeypot being set up, and we're going to get all these bad people on the internet, and they're going to pop into our thing, and we're going to watch them and learn how they're using attacks. And it's like, oh, well, that was a big mistake, because now the honeypot is owned, not through its own internal means, but they just kind of took over the container that it was running on. And it's simply because we're leaving API access open, accidentally. Now, I'm just going to go inception here a little bit, but what if, and I'm saying what if, the API for Docker was the honeypot itself of the honeypot? It just, just get me going here.
And then inside the Docker honeypot is another Docker instance with the real honeypot.
Yeah.
It's interesting though, because a couple different security firms who had set up these honeypots, are quoted in this article as saying like, yep, ours have been taken over this way. They're seeing an increase in attacks against these honeypots, which would seem to indicate kind of an increased interest in going after Docker images, which makes a lot of sense considering how heavily that is used within the dev community, right? And so it goes right back to supply chain. If the developers at a company are using Docker very heavily and using containers very heavily in that process, and they misconfigure something or leave something open, and you as an attacker can get in there undetected, you are directly in the supply chain now. Like you can directly influence that end product and what's going to come out.
Yeah. One of the things here, right? And I'll be honest, like this is something, I'm no Docker expert. I'm still learning the concept of modern containerization through stuff like Dockers and Kubernetes, and a lot of people are, right? And so it's still a very relatively new skill set and technology in the market. And because of that, maybe we understand some basic primers of how to get it up and running, and how to maybe deploy a container and things of that nature. But we're completely, missing the ticket when it comes to fully understanding Docker security when it comes to a lot of this stuff, right? And so the article is quoted as talking about you have to understand the level of risk, and especially businesses, you need to ensure that you can adequately monitor the attack services of not just hosts and devices and assets. So I'm going to add another one. So we talked about, asset inventory, and identity, and application inventory, but now our container inventory too, because it's a bit of a different machine, and it's a bit of a different kind of beast. And monitoring containers and those being an attack surface is an additional thing that's going to be added to a lot of people's plates, I can imagine.
And it's I think one of the reasons that this is so important is one of the companies that's quoted in this article says that they set up their honeypot, and within 3 hours it was owned. Like it was like 3 hours. That indicates that's like an extremely rapid turnaround. So if you are not paying attention to the configuration and security of these things up front and inventorying them up front, you're opening yourself up to a world of pain.
3 hours. Those mass scan scripts that are out there running, that's impressive.
Yeah. And it's, I think what makes it so dangerous is specifically, in one of these examples, the honeypot itself was compromised and immediately was turned around to run attacks against Russian and Belarusian targets, which is a huge problem if you are as a company. If Russia and Belarus decide, hey, we're going to investigate where these denial of service attacks are coming from, their investigation is going to point back to your company and not back to the attacker, because the attacker managed to get into your.
Oh, absolutely. They're proxying off of your resources and your hosts.
Yep. And now you are on the radar, right? And that's going to cause some obvious problems.
I was hacked.
So, it's important to note that the dark reading article does call out that, exposing that remote Docker configuration API is not common. Currently, there were 803 assets exposing port 2375 of all of the images that they scanned on Docker Hub, right? Okay. So that's not a huge number of assets that are configured this way, but it does show that, like, Some
Yeah.
people are just throwing these things out there without really paying attention, unless they're doing it intentionally.
And therefore, Docker Hub should now be part of your supply chain risk management.
Exactly.
And the whole thing loops right back around.
Yep. And so, yeah, it comes back to, you know, while this, again, is commonly just part of the kind of developer mindset of things, it needs to become part of your security stack as well. You need to have something that is monitoring, scanning, and looking at these and validating configurations. It needs to be part of your penetration testing. If you have automated penetration testing that can be scanning for anything within your environment that has this open, that's great. But if you're just doing regular penetration tests, right, guarantee you, if this exists within your environment, a penetration tester is going to want to go after it.
And if you need help with those pen tests, that's another great thing. Plugging here at the.
I can always rely on you to throw the sales pitch in.
How do you think they let us stay on the air if I don't pitch all the wonderful things we do here? So, but really though, it sounds like we've covered some really cool stuff for this week. I like the fact that we've gone full circle. You know, that's really, really exciting.
It's starting to feel a little bit like our early shows where it just became the Lapsus power hour. But you know, I think it's really interesting and fun to kind of sit down with you, talk about these things, and then see those stories evolve over the course of the next week as the things that we're talking about become more prominent or something changes. So I always enjoy this. I hope I know you enjoy it too. You tell me.
I love this.
But if you have joined us for the broadcast, thank you so much. We hope to see you guys again next week. And as always, I have been and will continue to be Tristan Morris.
And I am Jonathan Singer, and welcome to the internet.
Have a look around.